And in terms of the work that you do, I mean, the stuff I read about bias, people talk about conscious bias and unconscious bias. Are you looking at both, and you know, maybe you can address that in why do typical approaches to tackling bias in the workplace fall short? And I don't know if it covers both those types of bias or whether.
You know, I just don't think that's a useful distinction. You know, at some level, I mean, what the research shows is that privileged groups know a lot less about less privileged groups than vice versa. So being unconscious of bias is literally part of being a privileged group. It's not an excuse for why you remain clueless. The one of the challenges to approaching bias is, first of all, people have been very focused on what's called the implicit association test, which is one specific social science instrument that is an online test that measures response rates of, like, people associate an oven mitt with a woman faster than a man, but a baseball mitt with a man faster than a woman. So that's a measure of bias. But the problem with the implicit association test is it doesn't necessarily describe what's going on in the workplace. That's the Workplace Experiences Survey describes what's going on in the workplace. And increasingly what companies do is that they give the Workplace Experiences Survey to everybody and use their own data when they're training for bias. And that's very persuasive, rather than just some abstract test online that doesn't describe workplaces in general or your workplace in particular. The other thing that there are a couple other problems. Number one, people have treated the problem of bias as something that can be trained with a one-shot training or a once-a-year training. And, you know, you can't change a company culture by doing anything once. Even if it's straight from God's lips, you cannot change a culture by doing anything once. So that's been another problem. And the last problem really is that a lot of these bias trainings, they're just like a college lecture. Or they're just talking about how we all need to be more sensitive to each other. Neither of them provides to-dos tomorrow. And so when we do bias training, we use data, and we give people really concrete scenarios of how bias commonly plays out in everyday workplace interactions that resonate with their workplace, and then have people sit around in groups of 6 and brainstorm how they would feel comfortable interrupting the bias the next time they see it. And the research shows that kind of bias training can have an effect, and is particularly effective when it's combined again with interrupting bias in the organizational systems. That kind of approach can work.
Yeah, and everyone in the organization needs to be intentional about tackling bias. And I ask this question as a middle-aged white man myself, but white men have a really important role to play in this, don't they?
They really do.
Yeah, it's not about letting others do it. You've got to get involved and highlight some of these challenges, because particularly, as you said, a lot of these white men are in leadership roles. They've got a really important role to play. I mean, what would you say to a white man in an organization who knows there's a problem, but maybe is a little bit too afraid to get involved because they think that they don't understand the challenges enough?
Well, I would say read the book, because then you'll understand what's going on. And what one of the basic messages of the book is that, you know, we like to think that our organizations are meritocracies. But what the data show is that they're not, actually. That white men very often have to prove themselves less than any other group, that their politics are much simpler than any other group, that they are benefited by in-group favoritism, where white men, particularly white men from the same background, give each other the benefit of the doubt, and they don't give other people the benefit of the doubt. And that kind of in-group favoritism does not operate in the same way for any group other than white men. And so it's very important to recognize that the central message of DEI is that we need to create true meritocracies. The other point, I think, to white men is that the research shows that there's only one group in the workplace that can advocate for diversity without threatening career detriments, and that's white men.
Yeah.
And then finally, I think it's important to recognize and to really clearly articulate that, we're talking about social forces here. We're talking about we're all fish swimming up a stream, and some people are swimming with the current and some people are swimming against the current. But social forces aren't everything that makes a human life. It's not as if white men just, born on top and float through the air up to heaven. That's not real life. White men face real challenges. First of all, some of them are from very different backgrounds than most of the other. Class issues are a really important issue. And some people face psychological challenges, personal pain. We're not talking about everything, but we are talking about whether you're swimming with the current or against the current. And I think that's really important for white men to recognize.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.